Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe Podcast.
And the Animation Deliberation Podcast.
If you're a little confused, it's because today we are talking about The Bad Batch, which is a new Star Wars animated TV show coming to you starting on May 4th, Star Wars Day. And so we wanted to team up here at Star Wars Universe with the folks from the Animation Deliberation Podcast and get into this great animated show that's coming to us soon. All that and more after commercial break we have no control over.
Woohoo!
Welcome back. So we here are super excited about the upcoming TV show, The Bad Batch. And I think for many people, you may be looking forward to new Star Wars content. You may not really know what's going on with this. So we want this episode to be kind of a primer. This is going to be a chance for you to, if you saw the Clone Wars, kind of get caught up. If you haven't seen any of it but are excited for new content, get an idea of who these characters are, what their setting is, and what's going to be going on. And as I said, because there's a new podcast that's just started on the Stranded Panda Podcast Network called Animation Deliberation, since this is going to be a Star Wars and an animated show, we thought it'd be awesome if we could team up together. So I'm really happy that we're going to have, for this and all the episodes going forward of this show, J. Scotty St. Clair and Zuhar Ali. How you folks doing tonight?
I am one with the Force, and the Force was with... I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me.
I like it.
Thank you.
And I'm just excited to be here.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'm so glad to have both of you on. J. Scotty, you and I have worked together on a couple podcasts, but Zuhair, I've not gotten to work for you, so really looking forward to having both of you on. I've been really enjoying the both of you on the Animation Deliberation Podcast, and for folks who haven't checked that out, definitely subscribe to that. It's doing some great stuff, and they'll get to talk about what they've been covering towards the end. But let's just start by getting into kind of like what... This new show is coming, a new Star Wars show is coming. How are y'all feeling about that? How are you feeling about this, The Bad Batch coming to Star Wars on May 4th?
Zuhair, why don't you take the floor here as a resident, more experienced Star Wars fan, I will say.
I am very excited about it. The series kind of threw me off guard with just how good it is. As somebody who grew up on the prequels and as part of the rare batch that actually does love the prequels, this show that's kind of intertwined with it and enhancing the story in many ways has been really fun to watch. And as much as I enjoyed the Bad Batch, I wasn't quite sure what to expect from them and what we would be getting out of a sole show. Like, why did they need to do this? But seeing that we're going to be getting a show that's really covering the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, and actually being able to finally see this transitionary period on screen is something I'm really looking forward to dwelling into.
Definitely. What about you, J. Scotty?
Yeah, as I kind of alluded to, I'm definitely a Star Wars fan, and clearly I am a fan of animated content, but I'm a little bit more of a casual Star Wars fan these days. But I do have to just like turn the clock back to that Disney Investor Day where we got all these incredible announcements and we got that trailer reveal, and just the synergy of that day, and seeing Finnick Shan, or hopefully I guess spoiler warning, we're getting into some of the spoilers of the trailer, forgive me, but just I'm super excited to see how this series is going to take all the fans from the corners of the Star Wars universe, no matter what they're into. It seems like it's going to unite all the fandoms in that regard, and given how divisive the fandom has been in the past, that's one of the things I'm most looking forward to.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. And honestly, hearing that makes me really excited to have the two of you on because, first of all, as I've said before, we want this podcast to not just be for the folks who know the name of, every animal that they encounter on every planet and can tell us exactly why every lightsaber is the color it is. If you know that knowledge, that's awesome. But I think a lot of this podcast is about helping those folks who, maybe are newer to Star Wars or just are, they love the movies, but they haven't delved deep into things. And if you're excited about this new show and want to learn more about it, that's awesome. And so, Scotty, I'm glad you're here to kind of like, if Zuhar and I start going deep on something and you have no idea what we're talking about, I want you to be able to be like, wait, no, what in the world are you talking about?
Sounds good.
And also, honestly, I'm not a big prequels guy. I grew up on the original movies, so I also think Zuhair, having you here as the other person to give us some feedback from that perspective will also just be fantastic.
Positivity and Star Wars all the way.
Awesome. Let's start by diving in, and actually, J. Scotty, I'll turn it to you. So, What do you know about The Bad Batch?
Well, full transparency, in preparation for the show and for this podcast, I did watch the 4-episode arc from season 7, the final season of the Clone Wars, and that's really the only exposure I've got to these guys outside of that trailer I mentioned up top. And over the course of these episodes, I felt like we got in the first episode they were more the focal point. In the final 3 episodes, I think it was more Rex and Echo's story a little bit, as well as Anakin obviously got some scenes in there. But you really did get to know these 4 guys and these brothers, and I couldn't help, anytime you see a team of 4 guys, and especially when they're brothers, I always go back to one of my favorites, not only comic book series originally, but also a classic animated series, and that's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I got a lot of echoes from these guys there. Yeah, you guys agree?
I can see that. They don't have the pizza love, but they're definitely kind of a misfits idea,
Yeah, nobody's saying cowabunga, but Wrecker in particular likes to have a good time.
For sure. Well, and let's just kind of dive deep on where this is all grounded, because this show is happening during the Clone Wars, towards the very end of the Clone Wars, and I think we've had that referenced a couple times in the movies. Obviously, the prequels are kind of about the start and the end of the war. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that happened in this show was that we really went a lot deeper into all the things that were happening, including kind of the lives of the clones. Zuhair, what do you think we really got out of the Clone Wars in terms of like what we learned about the clones and who they are and what they were going through?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where they were bred to be soldiers. They were bred to win their missions, and as hurtful as it is to say, like, they were meant to be expendable. Yeah. But throughout the series, we see it more with the higher ranking guys, but they start to develop their own identities in the way they have their haircuts. Some have tattoos, the way they change their way they talk and their personalities and stuff. So you see that they're not just machines. They're not mindless. Like, they actually have like feelings and personalities and attachments to one another. Mm-hmm. Like, even in these Bad Batch episodes, we had Rex going like, I know Echo is out there, I recognize him, I know his voice. And jokingly, I want to say, like, yeah, like, thousands of you have the same voice, but to have that connection, to have that distinction of like, no, there's something about this one in particular that I have a bond with. So yes, they're weapons. There have been a few generals who look at them that way, but even the Jedi and the Council are starting to recognize them as individuals and give them names and treat them respect. And we see the brotherhood and the camaraderie between these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think, just for those who haven't seen it before, Rex is kind of one of the main characters of the show. He's below Commander Cody, who we met in the prequel movies, but is still kind of a leader of them, and becomes an important figure in that show. And Echo and Fives and are some of the ones who we really get to know over the course of the story. And I think that what you're talking about there is so important, and I think is going to be important for where the Bad Batch goes, because, at the start of the show, everyone only refers to the clones as numbers. And I feel like one of the most important parts of the story is what you're saying there, of them like developing their own identity. And even though they all look basically the same, they get haircuts and tattoos, and even though they're all voiced by the same person, D. Bradley Baker, who's just an amazing voice actor, and we'll get more into him in a second. But yeah, being able to see that individuality is such a great part of their story, I think.
And what develops a lot of that is experience on the battlefield. Like, yeah, they all grew the same way. Yeah, they look exactly the same, but they've been in different situations throughout a lot of their existence. Right. They've seen different things, whether it be, animals in the woods, or dealing with different planets, or if it just is with their contact with the droids. And then we have some people who are just on the ship. So their level of how they're dealing with their own trauma and the people that they've lost and the experiences that they've had, like, there's no way that you can treat the clones like you would treat droids or robots, because they have the experiences that actually make them respond and react to different situations as they develop.
For sure. The other thing I think... Oh, go ahead, Scotty.
I was just going to say, as someone that's like not as familiar with these characters, even like when they have their helmets off, obviously there are these like key visual differences, like that campfire scene where you saw Cody and Rex, both with their helmet off, they both, I mean, their armor obviously has different color schemes to help it make it easy to differentiate them. But like Cody just has the little divot in the corner of his hairline that shows what he's been through. And then just like tying it back to the Bad Batch themselves, like they are just so visually different from the rest of all these clones. And then even when they have like their darker armor on, they've all got these skulls that like designate who they are, but they all, like, I think of Tech, like his is like kind of like pixelated and has like the green hue to it that just kind of showcases his personality so much. So
Sure.
Even just visually they do a great job of showcasing the personality, and not just the Bad Batch, the other clones as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that I think is also really well done in the Clone Wars show that I'm kind of excited to see this show build on is we really get a sense of the relationship between the clones and the Jedi, and the clones and what is now developing into the sort of like non-clone military leadership, and we get sort of non-clone, almost all human people who are helping to lead the military, including a young Commander Tarkin, who that name rings a bell because he becomes Grand Marf on the Death Star. And I think that's one of the most interesting things there as well, because first of all, with the Jedi, we really get a story of, as you were kind of saying earlier, the Jedi are on some level seeing them as expendable, and the Clone Wars does a great job of showing how like the moral quandary that puts the Jedi in is part of what leads to their fall. But you can definitely see moments, I think, of where the Jedi and the clones are kind of having some tension with each other, and that, especially in the later seasons, there are some clones who kind of go against things because they think the Jedi aren't looking out for their best interests.
I mean, one of the storylines that genuinely hit me hard, I can't remember the Jedi's name, but the one that had 4 arms and each one had like a staff lightsaber.
Oh, General Krell.
Yeah, the dude was awesome, but man, did I hate him. But I think his arc was really what showed how well Anakin and Obi-Wan and Mace Windu, how well they treated clones. Because when it came to him taking command, it's like, no, like, screw you guys, you're meant to die and listen to my orders. I don't care how many of you have to go down. If I say do something, do it.
Right.
He just used them as cannon fodder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, I mean, it's a great story arc, and then at the very end of it had that he's actually just trying to be a Sith, which is kind of dumb, and I kind of just ignore that part, because the rest of it is exactly what you're talking about. It's that he's kind of like, he's had ordered he's meant to die and into battle, and he just has lost any, like, empathy or any sense of their humanity, or sentience.
Rex doing the best he can to, like, fight for it, too. It's like, no, these are my men, you can't treat them this way. It's like, you're a clone, shut up, do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Rex, too, because I think that's one of the other things the show establishes that I think the Bad Batch is really going to run with, is that because these are a group of people who have almost no contact with non-clones, they really only know each other, and they are, I mean, quite the same. They share the same DNA. They're quite literally brothers in that regard. They're all basically twins.
Sure. But
also they have this experience of, like, being military, serving together and stuff like that. The way Rex stands up for them, they really is a deep caring, and so we'll get to who the Bad Batch are and how we're introduced to them, but their story is all about, a bunch of clones risking their lives for one clone who they think may be still alive.
Mm-hmm. And we keep touching on the fact that this is going to be like the first interaction of like switching into a non-clone military. Remind me the what's the word I'm looking for? The fiction science behind this is that they didn't have enough of Jango Fett's DNA before he died, so they can't like reproduce anymore. And then like I think there was damage to Kamino and the building facilities, and that's why they physically can't make clones anymore. Like they can't produce them because they don't have the resources.
So I think, and honestly, this is one of the things I'm most excited to see in the new show. Because I think the question you're asking has been, if I understand it correctly, and I'm sure we'll get a bunch of angry emails from people telling me when I'm wrong, but is that a number of things in the Legends canon gave possible answers to this. And that one of it was that like what you're talking about, that it became impossible to make new clones. One of it was that as part of the Empire, they wanted to like cut control with the clones, or maybe even that Palpatine was like, well, if they I made them to turn on the Jedi, but maybe one day they would turn on me, so I have to get rid of them. Like, and it may even be in some of the newer books. I'm trying to read through all of them. I've read a lot, but I haven't read one that covers this yet. But yeah, I think that in the official canon, certainly in the on-screen canon, that question has never been addressed. And honestly, I think that's one of the ones that I'm hoping we're going to see here, in terms of like what happened to all those clones, and why is it that by the time we get to A New Hope or even Rogue One, it is now actual like people in those stormtrooper uniforms.
I thought it had been something that was addressed in Clone Wars. That's why I was trying to refresh my memory. But also in the Battlefront 2 video game for PlayStation 2, there was a mission in that game where, so you're playing as the 501st, and there's a part in the story where it's stormtrooper versus clone troopers,
right?
Because they're trying to wipe out the rest of the clones. And the clones' mission at that point is to destroy as much of Kamino as they possibly can, to to stop the manufacturing of other clones, because there's some who are just kind of like still with the Republic. I'm sure that game's not canon, but that was one of the few things that addressed that storyline of trying to wipe out the facility and kind of leave the Empire with like having to deal with real humans again.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it might not be canon, but it is the superior Battlefront 2.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
For sure.
Yeah, and I know that in another Star Wars show, Rebels, they do meet some older clones who kind of were able to escape Order 66 and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I think they talk about like a lot of the clones being hunted down and stuff like that. But I think we've had hints at the story, but we've never gotten like the full story.
Because they're kind of in retirement. And it's like the Empire's keeping eyes on them just to make sure that they're not acting out of line and just waiting for them to die off.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, I'm curious to see where we go with that story.
It's also fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I think is so good about this show, is just that we have so much of... You're right, this is the time period from, the end of when, the Padme's babies are born and everyone goes into hiding. We know almost nothing about this period. We've had the Kenobi book, which talks about what he's doing 10 years, 15 years later. Or no, actually, a couple years later. But we've had very little about the actual process of the transition to the Empire.
Yeah, Solo and Rogue One have been like our best little like snapshots into that time period at all, but they're pretty self-contained.
Right. And Rogue One takes place before A New Hope, but like 20 hours before A New Hope.
Correct, yeah. It's like right on the precipice, yeah.
5 minutes before A New Hope.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So in terms of on-screen, Rebels is probably the closest thing, being like, 8-9 years after the Empire started?
I think Rebels is actually 15 years. It's about 5 years before the Battle of Yavin, if I remember correctly.
Because it's like the start of the rebellion and whatnot.
Right, exactly.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, so it's going to be really cool being able to dive into... And the video game is kind of what influences my interest in the ground level action and why I was so fascinated with Rogue One. Because as much as I love lightsabers and the Force and all that stuff, I'm never not going to want it. But the storytelling of what happens on the ground and the everyday people and actually watching your comrades go down and stuff like that, this show being able to touch into a lot of that, and Clone Wars touching into a lot of that, is what's really got me hyped up, because there's so much storytelling to do. And I know on the podcast you've mentioned that the movies have done a poor job of displaying how big the world actually is, and that's what Mandalorian is kind of trying to do. And this is something that I'm excited to see, is more of the everyday boots on the ground type stuff.
Yeah. I think that's so well put, because I think that's exactly how I feel. Like, the Skywalker saga is a great story, but it always leaves out sort of that wide angle lens of what's actually happening, And I love that Mandalorian does that, and I love that. Yeah, I like man in the street stories. I like the stories of in the Clone Wars TV show. You find both people who really buy into the legend of the Jedi, and ooh, it's the Jedi, and others who are who are these damn Jedi? They're arrogant and dumb, And part of what I think is very interesting in some of the last episodes of the Clone Wars is that you can see that by that time Palpatine has manufactured a number of events that have caused the public to really lose trust in the Jedi, and where I remember when I watched Revenge of the Sith, I was sort of why would the general public just be fine with all of a sudden and then you watch Clone Wars, and you're oh, okay. no, they have done enough to make the Jedi like look fairly like, not trustworthy and alien and different, and maybe the public would go along with Order 66.
I think the motto of Clone Wars is just, okay at this point.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Bad Batch specifically. Jay Scotty, give us a quick rundown from what you remember of who are the Bad Batch. Like, first of all, just where do they come from, and who? Like, we'll get into the individuals themselves, but like, what's the story of who they are and where they come from?
So, if I'm not mistaken, it's Commander Cody that gives us the context that he's worked with them before, and they have 100% success rate with their missions before we even see them on screen. So there's kind of this, their reputation precedes them, and
right.
then when we do finally get introduced to them, they kind of fly in with pretty recklessly, like into a completely loaded landing zone, and almost like take things out, and just kind of like, you already know what you're in store for. And they've got this, like, they're locked and loaded with this story about why they're late. What was the? I don't have the planet off the top of my head, but it sounds like they were arguing about whether or not they were being swarmed or attempted to be mated with by what it sounded like an insectoid species of some kind. So
because they killed off the queen.
There's a very sort of devil. Like, you've seen these guys in 100 action movies. You know, they are the Tony Stark. They are the Maverick from Top Gun. They are the folks who are just like, I don't care. I'll get it done.
They're the Expendables.
The leader, Rex, is Sylvester Stallone. He looks like John Rambo, like down to the red bandana.
Definitely. And the way the story is explained, we don't really get much about it, but it's that they were all kind of like bad, factory defects.
Defective,
part of the,
right?
Yeah, part of the point of the clones is that they're all exactly the same, and each of these ones is. They have a defect, but in almost every, it's kind of like mutations, X-Men. Like, all of them are. One of them is that he's freakishly big, one of them is that he's very big and thus very strong. One of it's that he has just remarkable, he's like the dead shot of this universe.
Right.
One of them is, incredibly, and that's Wrecker, Crosshair, and then one of them, it just has like incredibly heightened senses, and so he's Hunter.
Right.
And then the last one is just, I think, brilliant and kind of a tech nerd, and so he's Tech.
Correct.
The names are kind of on the nose, but you can see how they become kind of nicknames.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really awful with names, and their descriptions kind of makes it easier to remember, especially with Star Wars and everything being verbal mumbo jumbo. So I'm glad they went really easy with these names.
Yeah, definitely. I think it helps.
And not to get too sidelined here, but Zuhair already mentioned like a great classic Star Wars video game. But with this group of four brothers, again, like I made the comparison to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles already, but it did remind me of the video game Republic Commando, in which you got to like spend time with a quartet of specialized clones. And the reason I bring that up is because I can't remember a single one of those clones' names. As great as they were, it is a wise decision on the part of the Bad Batch to kind of stick to simple names that remind you of who exactly they are and what they do.
And I'll say also, Republic Commando is based on a series of books, also called Republic Commando.
Cool.
And in those, kind of what they establish is the idea of like there's kind of these elite troopers who are, kind of like much more trained than the clones. And there's a kind of great backstory of them. Like, there is a group of like clone rejects who weren't properly, cloned, and like a Mandalorian like trainer helps adopt them. And it's clearly that, there's one more time where like the Legends canon definitely is like seeping back in here.
Sure.
Though I know also in doing the research for this, I was wondering if this was like a new story because it came out, just in this most recent season. But this goes all the way back to Lucas had actually wanted this idea. His concept of it was kind of like a clone's dirty dozen. These
sweet.
are like, they're kind of like anti-heroes. They're the Suicide Squad. They're the like, that they're not great guys, but that they'll get the job done, and so you cheer for them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you definitely feel that through line has evolved, but it's the essence of that is still very much there. Yeah. Especially with Crosshair with the toothpick, like constantly out of the side of his mouth. Very, very much Clint Eastwood vibes there.
He's my least favorite.
I think they intentionally make him kind of prickly and unlikable, but I like him for that reason. And
yeah, it's definitely an interesting group. I found that I kind of have the same feeling you are, that when I first heard about this show, I wasn't like jumping out of my chair excited, because these aren't the characters who I was the most like, oh my gosh, I need to see more of them. In the first couple episodes of them, I thought they were kind of a little bit one note in that, like, Wrecker wrecks things and Tech is really smart and things like that. And to me, it's more that once we get to really see the camaraderie between the four of them, as well as I think it's important that we say that I think it's pretty clear that there's now a fifth member of their group.
Yes.
So when you remember enough about the story of Echo to kind of bring us up to speed on that?
Well, I mean, I'll go ahead, and since I'm coming fresh off the episodes, I'll just go ahead and say, yeah, Echo had a past with Rex, and Rex believed him to have been killed, but he was actually taken captive by the Techno Union, if I'm not mistaken, and they were basically using him as like a living computer to create this algorithm. I guess the fact that he was a clone, the brain structure could be manipulated to create this algorithm in which they could predict the attack pattern of most clones, and it was really becoming the undoing of the Republic. But basically this 4-episode arc that we get introduced to the Bad Batch is the rescue of Echo and his eventual incorporation into the Batch.
Right.
The one thing that I want to add is that he was specifically one of the clones that was working with Rex, so he was familiar with the way that Rex thinks.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's that, and then I think one of the things the show establishes, though, is that because he has now been through this horrifically traumatic experience and been hooked up to a computer for so long, he doesn't really feel like he can be a normal clone again. And that's kind of why the Bad Batch adopts him, because they're sort of like, yeah, you kind of are a Bad Batch now. You're not just a regular clone.
Right.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing how he gets kind of like, he's the outsider, but he's going to kind of get integrated into the group in the course of the story.
There was a lot of dialogue about that, too, throughout the episodes, of them saying it's like, oh, that's really ballsy for a regular, or oh, a regular wouldn't do something like that, or wow, you're pretty strong for a regular. So
yeah,
there was foreshadowing like right off the bat as soon as Echo started interacting with them.
Yeah. Well, and that's also why I kind of call them the Tony Stark of this, because they're super arrogant. Like, they definitely think that they are, like, better than all the regulars, and the regulars are kind of terrible. Like, not terrible, but they're like, okay, you're the junior officers, we're the heavy hitters. And I think that's going to be a fun thing to see them explore, especially when... Because my understanding is, and I haven't seen as many of the trailers as you all have, and we'll get more into spoilers in a little bit, but my understanding is that... well, actually, let me give a bit of background, too, for those who haven't seen the show. One of the things that the show does, especially in this last season, but also somewhat in earlier seasons, is explain to us why the clones turned on the Jedi so quickly. And what they explain is that as part of the creation of the clones, they all had this microchip inserted into their brains that basically meant that, like, when they heard the words, initiate Order 66, it would sort of click in and they would just become, like, completely obedient, kill the Jedi.
Right.
And I think the concept of the show is that as part of them being, like, not properly programmed and not properly made, that they don't have that chip. Is that you guys understand? Like, I guess maybe we don't know. Maybe that's going to be part of the point of the show, is them wrestling with that. But that's certainly what I'm guessing going in here.
Part of me wants to think that when they got the execute order, that it was more of a suggestion, like something started ringing in their head, is like, we should probably kill this Jedi. No, I don't want to do that, because that seems to be their type of MO.
Right.
And as heartbreaking as it is, the flip side of the coin is that I kind of want them to have done Execute Order 66 and see an awesome battle sequence of them going toe-to-toe with Jedis and still being 100% on their mission.
Yeah.
As gut-wrenching as that would be, you have to admit that would look amazing.
And I will say, apparently, the trailer does address this in some way, and so I think I have not watched the trailer. I think Jay Scotty has. What we're planning to do with this is, I think a lot of folks are like me, and you want to go into the show without seeing any trailers. So this is going to have, like, no spoilers from the trailers until the end, when we're going to pause. I will quickly watch the trailer, and then we'll do kind of a spoiler discussion of that. So if some of you watch the trailer and are like, you idiots, this question's already been answered, that's why. We're just kind of doing a no-spoiler version of this first.
Even compartmentalizing the knowledge that I have from the trailer, I will say in the context of the 4 episodes here, I think what gives credence to the fact that I don't think that they probably participate in Order 66 is the fact that, speaking to that algorithm that I mentioned before that was generated from Echo, I think what was it, Trench? Was it Admiral Trench? I can't remember his ranking, but the arachnid.
The Separatist commander, like a big bug who controls that part of the Separatist forces.
Right, he's pretty upset because he believes that the algorithm should have been able to predict what they were going to do, and it just kind of shows that they're operating on a completely different level. If you didn't already know that, based on I did want to bring up that awesome scene where they get to work in complete unison. You get Wrecker picks up the piece of wreckage and salvage and uses that as a shield, and like they progress up the battlefield, and like they all get to use like their particular skill sets, but they do it as a team. You mentioned Tony Stark, but it definitely does have a like Avengers kind of feel. You got the heavy hitter, the specialist, the ranged person, and then the tactical leader. So yeah,
I mean they're a great D&D party. Like they would do really well on missions. They've got like a nice balance of skills there.
Yeah, right.
I fully expect the Bad Batch video game to be coming out pretty soon.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been doing a lot of Young Justice coverage too, and there's a lot of similarities in just kind of like the outcasts finally coming together as a team, and after a time jump, seeing how they just like snap their fingers and understand what the other person is thinking and doing, and being able to maneuver around that and have this unspoken language. Yeah, the clones have it to an extent, but they just have it to a whole new, like, almost on the same par as the Jedi.
Yeah. I think it's very true, and I think especially because, like, the clones, like you said, they have some individualism, but they all fight as, like, 100,000 soldiers marching forward in perfect unison and firing in perfect unison, They can do some individual tactics, but I think nothing like what these guys do. And
yeah,
sure.
There's some action movie I saw many years ago, and I have no idea what this was from, and maybe it's just a trope that I've seen a bunch of times. But it's basically where, like, the enemy has some, like, brilliant strategic leader, and no one can figure out how to outsmart them until along comes this, like, ragtag group who are like, look, we're going to do the thing that everyone thinks is way too dumb to ever try. But we're going to do it, and they're going to be like, I'm not going to plan for that. No one will be stupid enough to try that. But these guys try it, and they do it. That, to me, is like exactly who the Bad Batch are. It's like they're going to do the absolutely off-the-wall, devil may care. I'm sure this is going to get us all killed, but, like, the Bad Batch are the hold my beer folks of the clones. Like, that's exactly who they are.
Is it bad I thought of the first Fantastic Four movie as you were describing that?
I have not seen either. I saw about 40 minutes of the second Fantastic Four movie when I was in a very bad place in my life, and I think even without that would not have good memories of it from everything I've heard. But I haven't even seen the first.
Sorry to be that nerd, but I do have to clarify, when you say the first Fantastic Four movie, a lot of people don't acknowledge that there was a 1994 Roger Corman Fantastic Four that never saw the light of day, but it's out there, and I highly recommend it.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's like it was never released in theaters, but you can find like the Corman cut somewhere?
Correct.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a rights thing. Yeah, they basically made the movie to hold on to the rights, but
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, it doesn't make any sense because Hollywood's stupid, but yeah,
Right.
I understand that that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
So what else do we know about the Bad Batch? What else do you think is important to kind of for bringing people up to speed, and then we'll get into like what we're hoping for from this show coming out.
In regards to their dynamic, I binged the 4 episodes like right before we started recording, and one of the things that's really interesting about the personalities is I don't think they consider themselves clones. And I think that's a lot of what this show is going to cover, because they call the other clones regulars and this and that. And we talk about how the clones are trying to establish their own identity when in reality they're not too far apart from the person next to them. But the whole thing about the Batch is like, yeah, they mostly sound the same, but they're so far off of how they were designed that they essentially are just normal people with particular skill sets.
Right, they're not. Their faces look fairly different. They're radically different sizes. They're not all like the exact same height and weight the way the clones are themselves. And I also want to point out, I wanted to kind of use this as a segue moment for a second. You say that like the Bad Batch all sound kind of the same. I didn't hear that, to the point where, as I mentioned before, this guy D. Bradley Baker, an incredible voice actor.
Oh, he's prolific. Yeah,
he voiced all the clones in the show. And to give you an idea, like he's a huge part in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. It's not even one of the first things listed on his IMDb page because he's done so much else too.
Sure.
But in this, but the voices of the Bad Batch are so distinct that I thought for sure they must have gotten different actors in. And like it makes sense. Like they're different people. Maybe they have different vocal cords. Nope, it's still him. And if you look at the cast, he is going to play all the clone voices. And honestly, it's a reason why I'm excited to see it, because I think, like, generally, if you told me that most of a TV show was going to be one guy talking to himself, I'd be like, that can't work. With D. Bradley Baker, it 100% can. Like, he's just that good of a voice actor.
Their dynamic is really interesting, too, in the sense that they are the rebellious type and will do things our way. But Hunter is very respectful when it comes to, like, his commanding officers.
Yeah.
Like, he'll be like, hey, respectfully, sir, we got this. Don't worry about it. Or when his own guys will act out of line, then he actually is the calming voice. He is the bridge. He is the middleman between who he's essentially working for and the people that he's working with. He's the voice of reason when it comes to both parties. And I like that they have that dynamic of, we're not always going to go off and do our own thing. We're not like, screw you, screw the system. We do things how we want. Like, there is a level of discipline, I suppose.
Because I think it's part of the point is that they both do the thing that everyone thinks they're too stupid, that no one would be stupid enough to try, but it works. Like, they do have that 100% success rate. That I think they're not just a bunch of screw-ups who never get anything right.
Yeah. I do think it's worth mentioning as endeared the Bad Batch and Rex ultimately become through their trial through fire and combat, there is that initial butting of heads and questioning of leadership. And Zuhair, you mentioned, how Hunter, he is such a great leader because he really is the most level-headed, and he's able to diffuse that situation. There's a point in time where, like, Wrecker has Rex, up by the... is it Rex by the throat, or one of the clones up by the throat?
Yeah.
And Crosshair's ready to take out the other one, and Rex... I keep calling him Rex. It's just because he looks like Rambo so much, it makes me think he should be called that. But Hunter diffuses the situation, and then he also had that nice exchange with Rex in regards to, like, tactics. They talk about, like, stealth versus just, like, kind of rushing in. Right. And Hunter does defer to Rex's strategy, but then Rex also says, I kind of like your guys' approach here. I think we just, we rush in and do it headstrong. So
I just can't stop laughing at Wrecker's dialogue. He's like, hey, why don't you pick on someone bigger than you?
Yeah,
because it was Crosshair and Rex that were going toe-to-toe, and then Wrecker picks him up, and that's when Anakin was like, hey, go handle your guy, and Hunter was just on it right away.
Yeah, Wrecker is fun, and, like, there's a moment where he gets to blow something really big up, and I think it's Rex just says to him, here, you can do this. And he's like, this is the best. Anakin does. He's like, this is the best day of my life.
He's so happy about that.
He's much crying and wipes tears.
I really would like to get some more development of his character rather than he's just the comic relief. But, it's definitely going to be a thing.
Oh, for sure.
Well, again, I'll be curious, without really diving into spoilers, whether or not the Bad Batch do participate in Order 66, whether they're a part of the Empire or the New Republic or operating outside of that all. I do think they're going to have to change up their approach to things. I don't think they can be as headstrong and as individualistic as they've been without encountering some conflict. And maybe that'll be the through line of the show. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'll be curious how they do that, especially because, and this is kind of a good transition to start talking about what we're sort of expecting from the show or hoping from the show. I'll start by because I think there's so much I'm excited for. I'll start by naming, like, my one biggest concern, and it's sort of the thing that I love the Clone Wars TV show. I highly recommend it. Mm-hmm. We've been reviewing it on this podcast, but I think the only real problem with the Clone Wars TV show is that it has, and I've talked about before how I think this is also a problem with the prequels, is that the property of Star Wars that's in some ways talking about the most mature adult topics, everything from, like, government bureaucracy to the slow moral corruption of good people to, like, bank loans and, like, international finance, is also part of the show that's most explicitly aimed at kids.
Right.
And, like, the Bad Batch is going to be covering some topics that can be very deep and very adult. Like, there's no sexuality that's mentioned. That'd be great if there was, but, like, but in adult topics, so, like, very serious topics. And then you have stuff like Wrecker, who's, like, a character written for an 8-year-old to enjoy, and I enjoy it too. But it's like,
sure.
I'm very curious where they're going to sort of aim this show. Like, is this going to be a show that they really still want to be 8-year-old, 10-year-old friendly? Or is this meant to be for, it's more YA or even more like, kind of Adult Swim, like, this is for folks who grew up in the Clone Wars, but we're covering some much more serious topics in much more nuanced ways.
I certainly hope they kind of lean into that direction. Being on the Animation Deliberation podcast, one of the things we say, we take action animation and cartoons seriously, but not too seriously. But it's one of those things anytime you're dealing with animated content, or even sometimes just like genre content like this, like there is the necessity to cater to a 4-quadrant audience and get the most butts in seats as possible. But I really think that Star Wars has succeeded in terms of like Rogue One and The Mandalorian when they are tackling things in a darker tone, but a deft tone, and it's
I think it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think The Mandalorian and Rogue One specifically, if they can find that tone, it appeals to everyone, and I'd love to see the animated version of that. So
I think it's just one of those things where I'm just kind of playing it by ear.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely sure what to expect, because it is a Disney Plus exclusive more than it is a Disney XD thing.
Right.
And the dynamic of those properties kind of gives it more wiggle room, where it's like, yeah, it's animated, we'll throw the things in for the kids, but I think it is meant for like high school and up.
Yeah.
And it's going to be addressing that audience a little more than the intent of what Disney XD was.
I mean, like, I always thought the gold standard for this, you all know animation much better than I do probably, but to me the kind of gold standard of something that is nominally a show for kids but covers very adult content. Again, every time I say that, I think I'm talking about sexuality. The term can mean a lot more than that. But an animated kids show, but that covers very deep, very dark, nuanced topics, but still is kid friendly, is Batman the Animated Series. Like, to me, that, like, I sometimes wish that Clone Wars had gotten to that level. And so yeah, if this could be in that place, and I will say, if nothing else, I am one of the few kind of like child-friendly things that I couldn't stand about this era, that, if I understand correctly, in the Bad Batch TV show we're not going to have, we will not hear the phrase Roger Roger, which to me will just automatically make it better and more mature.
I don't know why I love the droid so much in Clone Wars. I guess it's just a childishness in me.
That's fair.
I mean, there's only so much. I mean, I really can't take Jar Jar in this show. He is what he is in Phantom Menace. I hate all the secluded episodes, but just the stupid things the droids do. Like, even when I was doing this rewatch, I was so locked into what the Bad Batch were doing, and the droids just had some dialogue that just had me cackling.
That's fair. And the thing is, like, I'm the Star Wars grumpy old man. I'm the fan who grew up with the original series, and I don't hate on like the prequels, but I definitely, like, they're not my movies, and maybe I would have loved them a lot more. So if I had watched them when I was younger, so I'm glad we have that perspective as well. So what about you all, though? What are you looking forward to in the show? What in terms of like just stuff that'll be fun, or topics you want them to explore, or anything like that?
Yeah, I kind of set it up top, but just being able to connect all these various corners and actually get to spend time in this pocket of the Star Wars universe and this time period that we have seen so little about, and we've always danced around. Like, that's honestly what I'm just really looking forward to seeing, and seeing what role the Bad Batch plays in this whole thing. Are they going to be, willing participants? Are they going to find a way to exist in this galactic empire? Are we going to find them maybe, help plant the seeds of the early rebellion? Or are they going to be, conscious objectors? Like, are they going to be more Han Solo types? That's honestly what I'm really just excited to see, and just how we talk about how Star Wars for so long has had the lens just primarily focused on the the Skywalker saga and the Skywalker family, and even in the 4 episodes we've been kind of discussing here, Anakin was very much present for a lot of that. So I'm just super excited to see the Star Wars universe and galaxy continue to grow and expand. That's what
Yeah.
I'm excited for.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that, especially that last part.
Yeah.
I'm going to refer to one of our affiliate casts. I was listening to Bingers Assembles, and they're covering the monster movies. And one of the interesting things that they say is that they have the human stories in those movies to give perspective and kind of like be what gives the direction to what the monsters are doing and where they are. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I want the Bad Batch to be. Is I want this to be a post-Execute Order 66 show that happens to have the Bad Batch in it.
Oh, that's a great way to think of it.
I don't want it to be too focused. I'm interested in the story. I'm interested in what they want to do, but I want them to be a placeholder to kind of give us an idea of what this bigger picture is. And the whole thing that I said earlier about I really want to see a scene of the Bad Batch going toe-to-toe with Jedi, I'm kind of wanting it a little more now because Revenge of the Sith made it seem like Execute Order 66 happened in a couple of hours and they were successful. But as we've seen with Star Wars Rebels and what's the newest video game?
Oh yeah, I'm playing it through right
Fallen
now.
Order.
Fallen Order.
Yeah,
we
Cal
see that
Kestis, yeah.
we see the rise of the Inquisitors and that Jedi have been in hiding and some have changed their identity to just they've kind of given up on being Jedi. We know that Ahsoka is still out there. We know Obi-Wan's still out there. So I
Grogu's
kind
gotta
of
be
want
out
to
there somewhere, right?
Sorry?
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have cut you off. I was just making a Grogu joke.
Oh
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess he's out there too. But I do kind of want to see the storyline of, we're dealing with the transition of Republic to Empire, but the Jedi are still out there. They're still operating. There's still hints of the rebellion. There's still people in the Republic who don't want to transfer. They don't see the benefit of this. I do want to see clones starting to train humans and maybe working together in like a joint faction, knowing that the clones are going to be dying off soon. Mm-hmm. But this whole thing of like the Jedi are still a problem at this point and we still need to hunt them, I think is something that they could cover, if not for the whole 14 episodes, maybe like 2 or 3 of them, like if that be like a partial arc.
Yeah.
There's a big picture, and I just want the Bad Batch to be what navigates through this whole point of time in the Star Wars universe.
Okay, I'm sorry to jump in here, but as Zuhair was speaking, I was kind of reminded of one thing I would like to see, and I am backpedaling a little bit because I just talked about how wanting to see things outside of the Skywalkers, but given the fact that the Bad Batch did have this interaction with Anakin Skywalker, it would be kind of cool if at some point during the course of this show, maybe they have an interaction with Darth Vader.
Ooh, yeah.
And then maybe he can actually, like, he senses, like, he knows that he's encountered them before. Yeah, that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I definitely think that would be an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of torn on that because, like, A, I would love that. B, I kind of like, though, the idea that they're so far, like, beneath the radar that no one on that level comes close to them. But,
that's fair, too.
Even if it's just, like, they're kind of, like, watching in a crowd while he, like, leads a public execution.
Ooh, there you go.
Wow, I got
like
dark
that.
there. But,
Yeah,
something
cool.
like that.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah. And
or even if it's Vader-Palpatine dialogue, because I imagine Vader's still getting used to his lack of appendages at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely
right.
true. Definitely true. Hopefully he's figuring out a better way to say no than he did in Rogue One. But,
yeah, Echo can help him with that.
Or not Rogue One, Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm where you are. I am looking forward to seeing the dynamics between them, like them Echo becoming more part of the group and them all having to adjust to, like, not being the badass hotshots anymore and their new role. But also, Zuhair, I really like what you said about, I just want this to be them kind of being like the eyewitness, like they're the point of view characters while we get to see, like, what happened to the Senate? Like, were there other senators who were like, F you, this doesn't work, and got executed? Or, what's the, like, I've joked before that, like, me and Riki, one of the two co-hosts I have on the shows about the Clone Wars, we both want to see like the full episodes of all the bureaucratic, financial, and political wrangling. It's not what most fans want to see, and I don't think we're going to get too much of that here, but I'd love to get a little bit of it, just sort of see like how's that transition, what happened to the Trade Federation, what happened to, all these different political alliances under the Republic.
Yeah, I think all that stuff is fascinating. It definitely paints a bigger picture. I mean, as much as I love the action stuff, they do such a good job at keeping me engaged with stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
So I would suggest here. Oh, go ahead, Scotty.
I was just gonna say I'm always on board for getting more nuance and context to the actual political proceedings, so they don't seem so just there to create a backdrop for.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a very good way to put it.
Right.
Folks, I think that's about all we're going to say about what we know about it without the trailers. In a minute, we're going to go into a spoiler section where we're going to discuss what we see in the trailers. For anybody who doesn't want to watch that, feel free to take off now, but to make sure they hear it all, you guys, why don't you talk a little bit about Animation Deliberation and what you're doing there and where people can find it?
Yeah. Well, and again, thanks for the opportunity. It's awesome to be able to collaborate. It's one of the things I love most about being a part of the Stranded Panda Network is getting to interact with great folks like yourself and have this level of collaboration between the shows. But yeah, we are the Animation Deliberation podcast. It is hosted by myself and my friend here, Zuhair Ali, and we are the podcast that takes action animation and cartoons seriously. And so we've been covering, the show was actually born out of just a conversation between the two of us. Zuhair recommended the stellar show Young Justice to me, so we just kind of started by covering that, and from there we've got no lack of content. There's already just a backlog of so many great animated action shows, but now we've got Invincible on Amazon releasing every Friday, so we've been doing our coverage of that, and it's been stellar. Yeah, and it's just been a really good time, so I encourage you guys to find us on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. It's Animation Deliberation Podcast, and if you want to hit us up with any feedback or anything like that, it's animationpodcast at gmail.com. And Zuhair, is there anything you want to say about the show? Because, I mean, you're just as much part of it as I am.
Yeah, we really do appreciate all the feedback that you guys have been giving us. If there's anything that you want to see on the action level, feel free to shoot us an email. But yeah, J. Scotty nailed most of it, and I'm just super excited to talk Star Wars animation.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been listening to your episodes. I haven't watched Invincible yet, so I haven't listened to those, but I love Young Justice. I watched it meaning to talk about it, and we never got around to it, so I'm so glad you guys are doing that. And maybe sometime I can jump on with you all and talk about the ethics of that show.
That would be great.
But yeah,
I have a list of things I want to talk to you about that.
Awesome. Well, and what we're going to get into in the trailers is I'll also say I am very much not a visual person. So I think there's an awful lot about the visual, like the way the show is animated, that I'm going to miss. And so especially when we talk about the trailers, but then also going forward, I'm really excited to have you all around to talk about it. So folks, definitely subscribe to their podcast. They're doing great stuff. Subscribe to everything else that's on the Stranded Panda Network. Of course, my podcasts are part of the Ethical Panda. So if you want to give us feedback or write into us, let us know what you think about this show, what you're excited about, what you're not excited about, what you're confused about. You can find us on Facebook or Twitter at The Ethical Panda. You can also email us at theethicalpanda@gmail.com. And of course, you can also find all of the information at the Stranded Panda Podcast Network by going to strandedpanda.com or join the Stranded Panda group on Facebook, where we have great chats about all this stuff. So for all of you who are not wanting to hear the trailers, thank you so much and have a great day. And we will be back with a spoiler section in 3, 2, 1. Oh my God, Tarkin is back.
I'm so excited!
Yeah.
Saw Gerrera as well.
Saw Gerrera is back. Fennec Shand, who's become a really popular character from the Mandalorian, played by Ming-Na
Wen.
Ming-Na
Wen, thank you. Is going to be there. Oh, all right. So let's talk about what you guys see in these trailers.
Well, yeah, right off the bat, you mentioned Tarkin, and he has some dialogue that I think is pretty pointed and telling. He talks about how effective, Clone Force 99 is, but they are disobedient and have a problem following orders. So
right.
We were just kind of like speculating, or do they participate in Order 66? Well, Obviously, they have a history of having a hard time following orders as far as he's concerned. So
yeah, I mean, certainly in this we see at first Tarkin talking about them as like people he's commanding, and then later he's giving the command to wipe them out. So
yeah, and then Wrecker's like, "Is that all you got? Come on."
Yeah. Now, let me just start with like on the animation side, because again, I think you all know this better than I do. The original Clone Wars was a very good show in a lot of ways. It was also made in like the early 2000s. The animation style was not always the best. A lot of it looks kind of like, bad video games from that time period. Am I right that this I mean, granted, it's 15 years later, so of course it is, but the animation in this looked incredible. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. I really like the character designs. They are stylized and simplified. I don't think that's the right word.
Simplified.
They're just simplified. Thank you. I don't know why I had such a hard time with that word. It's a pretty simple word, simplified. But there's so much fidelity and detail to these renders. Like the textures are so tactile, and like the hair has so much texture to it, and all the cloth, and like especially the environments are so detailed, and the particle effects and the damage that you see done from blasters and explosions and whatnot. It's super impressive, and it gives so much weight to all the action and the proceedings going forward. So I'm really excited to see. It's almost like a cinematic and movie level feel to it for sure.
Yeah, after watching Young Justice and Invincible for so long, like they don't have much of a gradient set in their colors. Like it's just straight one-tone yellow, one-tone blue, one-tone red type of stuff. So there is a lot of they're honoring the style that they've used all these years, but they've added just a whole new level of detail and clarity, and just the very minute things, like you said, like the hair and the way the body moves. And when I was watching the Bad Batch episodes, I was thinking, for lack of a better word, like as awesome as the action scenes were, they seemed clunky.
Yeah, I think it's
and
fair.
you can tell that was probably part of like the old regime. And when they did the last 4 episodes of Clone Wars, you could tell just by the opener, I was like, this is different. They've put a lot more work into this. There's been more detail into this. This is what we're getting out of Disney Plus. And you're seeing that level of fluidity being transferred into what's going to be the whole season of the show. And I am so excited for it.
I mean, there's a lightsaber battle in the last couple episodes, and I don't want to say it's between, in case people haven't seen the rest of Season 7 of the Clone Wars, although definitely I recommend you should.
Right.
But I would honestly put it in the top 5, if not top 3 lightsaber battles in all of Star Wars. Like, it's
Agreed.
just incredibly animated and incredibly well done.
Agreed.
Yeah. So what else? So I think a couple of... Oh, Scotty, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, even kind of like dialing it back from this trailer in particular, like Zuhair, you're talking about the action from those 4 episodes being a little clunky, and while I can concede that a little bit, one of the things I did appreciate about it, and one of the things I'll definitely be looking forward to the show, is when you're working with an animated series, one of the benefits is you don't have the same constraints that you do with a live action property, not only from the budget, but the way you're able to position the camera. So I just really love that boots on the ground feel. Like you're able to like basically put the camera like right on a person's hip. So you almost have like this holster feel to it, like running through the battlefield. And we got a couple shots like that in the trailer. So I'm just really excited to see what they're able to, how they're able to up the ante in terms of that like camera placement and cinematography and choreography, like you guys are speaking to. So.
Yeah, my favorite scene in the 4 Bad Batch episodes from Clone Wars was when the 4 of them went in for the breach, and the camera was like behind them over the shoulder, and you're like following them down the hallway and like panning over to see what one team's doing, then moving over, and like stuff like that was so cool on the Disney XD side of things. And I'm really excited to see what it's like when they have like a blank check to just go all out with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like when you're talking about the clunkiness, to me, what it really reminds me of, especially in those Bad Batch episodes, is it reminds me of like cutscenes in video games. You know, where just like the characters are moving, but it looks like that they're kind of like pre-animated. This looks realistic. I mean, it's animated clearly, but like the explosions and the space battles, like it just looked like anything you would see on screen. And the technology is there, but obviously they're spending a lot of money on it, so I'm super excited for that.
Of course. Yeah.
So in terms of some of the story stuff we get, so I think clearly, I kind of like these trailers because they don't tell us, they give us the broad details, but they don't tell us too much. It feels like Tarkin is probably going to be our kind of like main antagonist. Like, you're right, maybe we'll get Palpatine a bit, maybe we'll get Vader a bit, but I think, because Tarkin especially, like one thing we saw a lot from him in the Clone Wars TV show was him sort of like not thinking the clones were the right kind of soldiers needed, but also he was constantly saying that the Jedi were bad generals because they weren't willing to be ruthless. And there's one very chilling scene in the Clone Wars where Anakin agrees with him, and you're like, I see what's happening here. But yeah, like I think that's a really interesting dynamic to see is with Tarkin as sort of the big bad. He's great in A New Hope. We never really got enough of him, and so I'm really looking forward to him here.
Yeah. Other than Tarkin, like the character that seemed to get the most dialogue was Hunter, and he's talking about the squad themselves, and he says, we're nothing but trouble, and it looks like he might be talking to several different people there, but we get the job done. So it kind of makes me wonder, is like this team going to go through their dire straits? Are we going to see them disbanded and kind of like do their own thing and then come back together when the time's right? We got a few shots of this young blonde girl that it seems like they are, rescuing or transporting or giving safe passage to or something. That's all I'm able to extrapolate from these particular trailers. I don't know if you guys had any further insights as far as Hunter or this young girl goes.
I'm going to mention two things off of what you just said. The first off, you said that Hunter seems like he's talking to groups of people. I'm really hoping that there's scenes where the higher command is doing a mission debrief with Hunter. So you can see him explain his perspective, and maybe the commanding officer for the people he's working with are giving their perspective on, like, we were trying to do this, and these dumbasses went out here and did this and that, and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, well, we got the job done, didn't we? So I
can't
want to
handle the truth.
Yeah.
As much as I want to see the action scenes, I want to see the aftermath.
Yes.
Because it's not heat of the moment of them actually talking about why they did what they did and what the mission actually was and how it went through and why they want to use the Bad Batch, but like obviously it's causing rifts between here and there because they're not working with clones anymore. So they're actually hurting people's feelings, and there's not as much of a compliancy when you're working with people as much as when you're working with other clones. So there's that backlash. The second thing that I want to bring up is the girl that you brought up. The first time we see her was in Camino. And that was the thing that I wanted. I was like, what happened with Camino? What happened with the reproduction of the clones? Right. And it looks like we're going to be seeing a lot of that. And I feel like she's going to be a key to a lot of that too, which is why they're probably trying to get her out of there. Also, a bow and arrow that just flips over and has like a little like lightsaber material looking string. That looks awesome. I'm very excited to see some Star Wars archery.
I'm looking forward to that. My first thought, I have to admit, was, we get a kid in this. Okay, so it will be a kid's show. But honestly, from everything else, it looked like, it's a Stranger Things kind of a use of kid, not a, because it did look like, there's some really interesting stuff. It didn't look like it was like dumbing things down at all. The one other thing that I will say is, and I don't know if this is about this kid or not, the something I've read online a couple of places, and it might be complete nonsense, it might be fairly accurate, is that apparently there's been some hints and some spoilers or whatever of the idea that part of what they are going to be doing by the time they're like doing like their real mission toward the end of the season is basically trying to like smuggle out young Force-sensitive kids who are like the Empire's trying to hunt down.
I'd love to see that.
And so like maybe she's one of those, or maybe she just like can help them, lead them to those. I'm not sure, but that could definitely be an interesting dynamic as well.
You talk about not wanting to see the kid. I'm kind of getting young Ezra vibes out of this.
That could definitely work. Ezra,
Sorry, Scotty, what were you saying?
I have two things.
Ezra is a character from Rebels, one of the main stars of Rebels, who we meet as kind of like a teenager. Sorry, Scotty, go ahead.
No, you're good. I had two things I wanted to say about this child, and the first one was what you brought up about the potential of them finding Force-sensitive children. That's a great opportunity. Again, I talked about how one of my hopes for the series is just tying the various different parts of the Star Wars universe back together, and we brought up that great video game Fallen Order, and spoilers for that game, but one of the major parts of Or you said you're in the middle of playing it, huh?
Yeah, I'm about 60% of the way through the game. How big of a spoiler is it?
I'll just kind of I'll kind of hold off on that then for you. It's a great game, so enjoy it, and it's got a great story.
Okay.
But what the other thing I wanted to say about this young girl is we do see her hairstyle change just in the few little snippets that we see. So I'm wondering, is this a significant passage of time, or could it be something like in the case you already made the Stranger Things comparison there? Maybe she just needs to change her hairstyle and appearance in that regard. But
that's cool.
I do wonder about the passage of time because, Zuhair, you mentioned her firing a bow and arrow, and I got I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Gears of War series, but you have an arc bow in that it really reminded me of.
Oh, nice.
And she seems like a much more competent and willing participant in the proceedings, just in the small exchanges we got there.
I got Destiny vibes off of it.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
When we have seen bows and arrows used by the Night Sisters in the Clone Wars, and they were a group of they're actually from the planet that Darth Maul is from, Dathomir.
Oh yeah,
right.
And they're Force sensitive, and they use the Force on the dark side, but they're not the Sith. And there's all this stuff about is it magic, is it Force, etc. But yeah, so it looks like this position's not connected to them. It's a very different color scheme. They were all reds and blacks, but definitely it looks like that could be a fun little thing. These kind of somewhat Force controlled bows and arrows, or maybe it's just a laser bow and arrow. But either way, it could be pretty awesome to see.
Yeah.
I just do need to make a quick point. I think that the story involved in Star Wars Fallen Order is fantastic. Here I'm going to be a grumpy old man. The fact that they're putting so much really interesting story in a platformer that doesn't have an easy mode makes me so angry because I hate the game itself. I hate it.
It's a game that was marketed to casual gamers that is not a game for casual gamers. I will say that.
Really not. And
I stopped playing after I finished the first planet because it's I game for story. I hate multiplayer games so much these days. I want a good story. I want to be engaged. That's what video games. I need an interactive movie, basically.
Yeah.
And as much as I love the story that this game provides, oh my god, if I get killed by a freaking goat one more time before I get off of this planet, then I haven't touched the game in so long because the goats just pissed me off to such a high extent in the first planet.
Yeah, the perfect hand-eye coordination and just the problem solving. It's not what I enjoy. And I think it's fantastic for those who like platformers. But to me, to put a Star Wars story and not just make it a simple RPG that has a story mode is just crimp. Anyway, that's my own rant on a different subject entirely. But but yeah, I do think it'll be fun if we get some of that story tie-in. One thing I've always thought is, I love The Mandalorian, but it feels very weird that we're getting introduced to Grogu as this Jedi who was hanging around during the prequels at the Jedi Temple, but we never saw him. Which, that's fine. He was just one of many younglings. But I'd love it if they are rescuing Force-sensitive kids. I don't want to see Grogu on screen. I just want one person to say wait, did Grogu get out? And someone be oh yeah, no, he went a different way or something like that. Just some acknowledgement that we're in that same universe.
Yeah.
Would definitely be fun.
Yeah, I think that would be the way to do it. Yeah.
If my theory or my desire of the Bad Batch hunting Jedi comes to fruition, I kind of want the Inquisitors to be what replaces the Bad Batch if they break off from the Empire. It's we need a Jedi hunting solution now, and Vader's on his robotic feet again, so maybe he could start training somebody to handle the job.
I mean, I could see that if maybe at first Palpatine doesn't want any Force users around. He wants the idea that the Jedi are just completely gone because most people don't know that he's a Force user. So yeah, that could be kind of cool for sure.
Or he recruits some of the younglings.
Yeah. I think we know from, among other things, that video game, but also from some other sources, that most of the Inquisitors, for those, by the way, who don't know, the Inquisitors are dark side Force users who aren't Sith because of the rule of two, but they are dark side Force users who are working for Darth Vader to hunt down Jedi, and that many of them are former Jedi themselves, especially younglings who got abandoned during Order 66.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to make the. I mean, I'm stumbling over my words because it's an awkward subject matter, but Lucas did get a lot of inspiration for the original Star Wars and Stormtroopers and whatnot, and the Empire from World War II and the Nazi Party, and I would compare the Inquisitors to like the Gestapo.
Yeah, I think that's great.
So.
And I will say also, just on that subject, I mean, they're literally called the Stormtroopers. If I understood correctly what I was seeing, it looked like we very distinctly see, at least in some of these shots, people who are very clearly Stormtroopers, not droids. Like their uniforms are different in all the ways that the Stormtrooper uniform looks different from the clone uniform. Did you guys see that as well?
I did. Yeah.
I noticed switches. Like there were scenes where it was still clone, and there were scenes where it was Storm. So I think that's where the uniform transition is going to happen throughout the series, because they're still fighting droids too.
Right. There are
so
droids.
I think this is going to handle the story of the Trade Federation too, where they're finishing off the war, dealing with the droids and whatnot, and as it transitions over to setting up the Empire, there's going to be like a whole rebrand process, and that's where the new armor and the new look starts to kick in.
Well, I mean, we see on screen, we see the moment from a different perspective, people watching on TV, but we see the moment where Palpatine gives his speech declaring that we're no longer a republic, we're now an empire. So what I'm guessing is that the first couple episodes will actually be set like at the same time as Revenge of the Sith is happening. So that may be like where the droids are coming in, and then once the Trade Federation is defeated, they all go away, and then we move into the Stormtroopers or things like that. So yeah, I think we're going to get those transitions that we were talking about, wanted to see.
And like I said, like I love Revenge of the Sith, and the more I watch Clone Wars, the more I realize how much stuff has been clunked into making it seem like all of this happened within a day or within a few hours. So I'm liking that this is really spreading out that timeline and knowing and showing how gritty everything actually was on the ground.
Yeah. And I want to see, for me, some of my favorite parts of the Clone Wars TV show are moments when Anakin or Ahsoka and others like go out into the public and realize that not all the public love the Jedi, and some of them blame the Jedi for the war, and some of them think the Jedi are haughty and obnoxious. And I want to see the Bad Batch talking to like the local bar owner or the shopkeeper or whatever, or just the guy on the street who's talking about like, yeah, I always thought the Jedi would be evil, or no, I don't believe the Jedi could do this. What's this Order 66 nonsense? And then Stormtroopers come and take that person away or something. Like, I'm just really excited to see more of that, like what the world thinks of what's happening.
Yeah. And just like talking about the darker tones and like providing more context and nuance for the world. Like one of the great things about like just Disney Plus series in general, just outside of Star Wars, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well, is we've been able to tackle like series that dive into like these heavier themes. And I've got to wonder, like, even though this show is animated and will obviously be including, younger audiences along in the proceedings, do you think it's going to tackle like some heavier themes like PTSD and whatnot? Because we did get to see a character like Saw Gerrera, who's been a little more problematic in terms of his tactics and his outlooks on war and whatnot. And he has that exchange with Hunter again where he says, the Clone Wars are over. Like, I very much got the feeling that they're still always going to be looking for a fight. They are defective clones, and like there may be some baggage that comes with these special gifts. Like, maybe as they progress through life, these gifts are not everything that they're chalked up to be, and may make it a little more difficult for them to blend in like maybe they want to. Like, you definitely get that vibe from Hunter. He's in his civilian clothes, just kind of flying around on Coruscant. Who knows what he's up to there? Yeah,
I mean, I think one thing the show established is that the clones were never expected to lead normal lives, and so no one's ever thought about them. They're not paid a salary of any kind. They're just like they're basically like slaves, and that was definitely a problem for the Jedi, especially, and kind of, like I said, it kind of corrupted them. But yeah, I think it'll be great to see these because I think you're right. That's a very real world story of Falcon and the Winter Soldier has been exploring it well, of like when you've been a warrior all your life, what happens when the war is over?
Mm-hmm. And they grow faster too, right?
Yeah.
Don't they physically age faster? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think
it's a good question. Yeah,
they're supposed to come to full maturity. They say in on one of the scenes in Camino that they come to full maturity in about 10 years.
Okay, that sounds right.
Yeah. So, well, we've been going on for a while. I am going to say to our audience, my hope is that when we record in the actual episodes, we're going to keep them a lot shorter. Try to keep it to about like 30 minutes or so, which probably means 40, but we'll try to keep it short. But do you have any kind of last comments you want to say before we wrap up?
I think I'm okay. Again, I'm just excited for this whole show and the opportunity to get to discuss it with you guys. And it's, again, I say it on all the shows that I pop up on, but it's just such a great time to be alive and be a fan of this stuff. We're blessed with so many great shows.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of rifts between Star Wars fans lately, and I'm really excited that they're going into a direction that kind of follows the MCU train of things. I'm excited to see what kind of stories they come up with, and I'm hoping that everybody can enjoy it for what it is and have a good time watching this new content.
Yeah, that's definitely how I'm feeling too. I am one of the people on the Stranded Panda podcast network who is like, I love the MCU, but I'm much more of a Star Wars fanboy. And so there was a while when like Star Wars was kind of like the, redheaded stepchild. And I say that as a redhead and a stepchild at the Disney table. And seeing that, like, yes, the MCU is getting some amazing stuff, and I'm so glad for it. I've been covering Falcon and the Winter Soldier on the Ethics podcast. It's a great show. But just seeing that we're going to get so much new Star Wars content, and that Disney, I think, is very intentionally not putting any Marvel content, at least for the first month of this show, to really let it be on its own. I just think it's going to be a golden age of Star Wars content for a while. I say that, like, I remember saying in 1999, I was super excited for these new Star Wars movies. But like, some people love them. So I'm hoping we're going to really get some great stuff. So, well, thank you both so much. To our fans, again, please check out Animation Deliberation. To our fans, as I said, please check out the Animation Deliberation. It's a great podcast. And check out all the other stuff on the Check out all the other stuff on the Stranded Panda Podcast Network. You can get great stuff there about the MCU, Star Trek, ethics discussion on my other podcast, DC Universe, Bingers Assemble, all sorts of great stuff there. So please check it all out. And I hope you're going to subscribe to this and listen to our episodes on the Bad Batch, as well as the episodes will continue dropping on. We've just about finished wrapping up the Clone Wars, and then we're going to go into Rebels. So that'll be other great stuff. And have a great day.
Roger, Roger.